which is actually an abstract entity and actually does exist unless you have issues with abstracta. So notice that there are certain category mistakes that you could say. Or maybe category mistakes that don't occur but would occur if we didn't make this distinction. So we say about Sherlock Holmes that he was a detective and that he was smarter than Watson, and that's within the fiction. We also say about Sherlock Holmes that he was a very fleshed out character, whereas Watson was a pretty flat character. Now that's, I think we're not talking about the same thing. It's not that the detective was fleshed out. What does it mean for a detective to be fleshed out? And the assistant of the detective is not flat. Was very horizontal kind of assistant. Vertical, I mean. Right, he was a vertical and not a horizontal assistant. So I think actually that kind of objection to fictionalism completely rests on a mistake. On the mistake being not recognizing that these terms are actually ambiguous. There are other responses to these particular problems with fictionalism. Stuart Brock has a clever response where he says, in the fiction of the realist view of fictional characters, blah, blah, blah. And then you can say everything you want to say, and it works. But I don't buy that because I think he's responding to a pseudo problem.
So if you, I like that response, obviously.
Mine or his?
Yours,
Thank you.
But if you do that, then you do want to say there's a sense in which there are fictional characters.
Yes.
So why not also allow that there are these merely intentional objects which distinguish intentional objects and intentional characters, if you like, the same distinction, but then we would allow that there are these kinds of intentional things in some sense.
What I want to say is that these fictional characters, these literary entities, construed as something different from fictional individuals. They exist as far as the issues about fictional individuals are concerned. There might be other reasons. If you're a nominalist who rejects the existence of any abstracta, independently of the fact that you're also unhappy with merely intentional objects, then you will reject both the existence of fictional individuals and fictional characters. So I think it's just an open issue. The putative entity here is different. That's all I want to say. There are different issues about whether you should accept either of these putative entities. As it happens, I actually don't agree that there are fictional characters, but I think if there were fictional characters, that wouldn't make the number 3 exist. That wouldn't settle anything about mathematical entities, because that's a different kind of abstract entity. You seem puzzled. Okay.
So this is somewhat along the same lines as the Mark and Amy line of questioning, where I'm worried not just about your use of fictionalism, but also about adverbialism. And what I'm worried about is that, so to block this sort of commitment to these merely intentional entities, you're it seems to me freely throwing in, according to the fiction operators, and freely helping yourself to adverbialist constructions. And what I'm worried about is that unless there's some constraints on when you can do that, and this question is going to be along the lines of inviting you to articulate some constraints, this is just going to trivialize all ontological commitment whatsoever. And a quick way to see that, take your construction X perceives red that you took paraphrases X perceives readily. You could just as easily, had you wanted to, gotten rid of commitment to X. You could have said, for instance, the world perceives Xly red. Or you could have said, according to the fiction of persons, X perceives red. So if you can just help yourself, this is sort of a general point, it's sort of fairly well known, that you can help yourself to fictive operators and adverbial constructions, all sort of semblance of ontological commitment is basically help yourself be committed to whatever you want. You can be committed just to this table over here and just paraphrase everything as adverbials about the table. The table perceives X readily. So what are the rules of the game? Otherwise, it seems like you're just replicating whatever starting intuitions you want.
Okay, so this is something. There are two things I want to say about this. cute little thing in the actual response. Maybe I should just say the response. In the paper in which I defend in adverbial view, this is not this paper, but another paper, it defends the adverbial view of intentionality. I discuss a little bit what's the purpose of paraphrase. What are we doing when we're doing a paraphrase, and the methodological issues there. The way I see it, a paraphrase doesn't settle any issues. We can imagine a world where people just speak. They say, I perceived redly yesterday, and I was thinking dragon-wise today, and that's just how they speak. And an adverbial theory of intentionality is kind of suggested by the way everybody speaks. And then comes the clever philosopher and says, but wait a second, there's a paraphrase. Maybe it's actually a relational, deep down it's a relational phenomenon. And it will get us all these other excellent features. Maybe it will land us in a can of worms, but otherwise it's pretty good. So the paraphrase just shows equivalence between two things, but the fact that you can produce a paraphrase, and the paraphrase is inferentially integrated in the sense that it has all the same inferential connections as the paraphrasee, shows that the alternative metaphysics is intelligible, is viable. Now you have two competing metaphysics. Each of them is viable and intelligible. And now you have to have substantive arguments as to which one you actually want to go with. In the case of perception and intentionality across the board, I want to say there is reason to go with the non-relational account of intentionality because it will get you out of the can of worms of figuring out what merely intentional objects are. In other cases, you might say, but wait a second, here I prefer not to go with the paraphrase and stick with the paraphrasee because it has more advantages. You seem unhappy.
Richard.
So I wanted to try pressing Jackson's objection.
Yes, thank you.
I can't claim to speak for Jackson, but it seems to me that yes, well, go back down 3 slides down. So just no, the next one down, I think. No, keep going.
That can't be it.
Yeah, well, next one. That's the one. Thank you. To get around the problem, we threw in this extra premise 2. Proceeding rectangle is a determinable blah blah blah. And here's my worry. Well, I guess there are 2 worries. First of all, when you make this inference, it doesn't feel like you're appealing to some extra premise like this too. So it just seems we go straight from seeing the blue rectangle to saying, oh, that's a rectangle, without appealing to some knowledge we have about blue rectangularness. So that's just the way it feels. Perhaps a deeper worry I have is that it seems we're going to have a lot of knowledge of this kind of sort that he was throwing in here about these properties. Blue rectangularness is a determinable of blueness and bluish, however it was. And it seems there's a hell of a lot of this knowledge, and the worry is, where do we get this knowledge from? It's not just sort of breaking down conjunctions and predicates or something. Where does it come from?
Let me address the first question first because I actually thought about it. I think, I'm not sure it's right that it feels like the inference is direct, and I'm also not sure that it would matter if it did. So for the first part of this, consider when you say it's